Okay, I want to end our morning session with a short charge on the Psalms. Okay, try to guess which dramatic movies, anybody like movies here? These are from. Why have you rejected me? Why are you sleeping? Look away from me that I may smile again. I am helpless, I am languishing. I'm forgotten as though I were dead. Well, you probably guessed it correctly. Those lines are not from movies, they're from the Psalms. Yeah. Okay? Yeah. So, if movies try to project or portray real life, the Psalms do so in high definition. Psalms reflect our lives. Why have you rejected me is in Psalm 43, verse 2. Why are you sleeping is in Psalm 44, verse 23. Look away from me that I may smile again is in Psalm 39, verse 13. I am helpless, that's found in Psalm 88. Languishing, Psalm 6. I'm forgotten as though I were dead, that's from Psalm 31. The title of this short charge is Honest Prayer. I want to study out the lament passages in the book of Psalms. We've already mentioned that Psalms are poems, they are songs, and also they are prayers. And we've also mentioned there are three basic kinds of Psalms. There are praise Psalms, lament Psalms, and thanksgiving Psalms. In this portion, I want to focus on laments, because laments give voice to our cries and our pleas when we are in trouble, during times of suffering and pain. But my specific goal for this charge is to encourage us to be more honest to God in prayer. Here's some insight from one author, Eugene Peterson. He has this comment. He says, our habit is to talk about God, not to Him. We love discussing God. The Psalms resist these discussions. They are not provided to teach us about God, but to train us in responding to Him. The Psalms train us in a conversation of language from talking about God to talking to God. Does this make sense? Yeah? So this should help us, right, to see how we should pray. We need to imitate the vulnerable, gut-wrenching honesty in the Psalms. So the Psalms invite us to reflect that how honest are we in our prayers? We need to think about why, by the way. Why do we have dishonest prayers? Why do we have prayers that border on the trite? I think upbringing is crucial. Early on, we're taught to downplay or stifle our emotions. You know, when a kid says, I'm scared, what does the parent say? Don't be scared. When you're angry, you're taught, don't be angry. If we're happy, don't be happy too much, right? You know, that's not good. I think religious tradition is also a factor there. In the religious world, prayers tend to sound nice. Prayers tend to be high-sounding, with multi-syllable words. I know for me, I grew up in a church tradition, where eloquence had to be a characteristic of prayer. The more eloquent the prayer, the nicer the prayer is. That was my religious tradition. And I'm happy that's changed. Environment is also crucial. It's important for us to understand how we are products of our environment. Isn't it typical for people to tell you when you're suffering? It's typical for people to tell you to just move on. Hey, it's going to be okay. Often they say this prematurely after a bad experience. I've attended like so many funerals where people go, it's going to be okay, or you're all right. But you know what? There are times you have to say, it's not all right. You know, I'm struggling right now. You know, in Asia, back home, in Asia, we hide our feelings. You know, we stifle our feelings. Even when you're bitter, right? You just don't say it. In some cultures in Asia, it's better to avoid conflict than to have conflict of any sort. In some places in Asia, it's better to lie than to hurt someone. Better to lie than to cause discomfort. But that's how we are in Asia. We hide. Even bitter feelings become vengeful feelings. You hurt me, I'll just smile. I'm smiling now, you're smiling now, things seem okay, but one day you will feel the wrath and fury of my kung fu! That's how we are, right? But if you look at the Psalms, you look at the contrast. Why, O Lord, do you stand far off? Why do you hide yourself in times of trouble? How about this? Strike all my enemies on the jaw. Break the teeth of the wicked. Psalm 7. Wake up, my God, and bring justice. It's like saying God has been sleeping all along. Psalm 22 says, every day I call to you, my God, but you do not answer. Something wrong. O Lord, how long will you forget me? Forever? How long will you look the other way? As if to say that when I call on you, God, you look the other way. It's almost like they're accusing God, right? But I am worm and not a man, scorned by mankind and despised by people. This is so honest. He calls himself a worm. I don't know if that's ever happened to you in fellowship. Hey, bro, I'm not doing well today. I'm a worm. I don't know if you've ever felt that way, but the psalmists are so honest. I am small and despised, yet I do not forget your precepts. So, sometimes the prayers are raw, they're crude, even sounding disrespectful, but these prayers were accepted. They're in the Bible. So, what we see here is that prayer and praise in the Psalms, any form, any sort, is liberal but sincere. They were authentic prayers. Even in the way they describe their enemies. Psalm 7:1 says, they will tear me apart like a lion. The wicked man conceives evil and is pregnant with mischief. Other descriptions of the wicked or enemies. The wicked go down to the realm of the dead. They sharpen their tongues like a sword. They persecute him whom you have struck down. Another one, they have devoured Jacob and laid waste his habitation. You sense a lot of anguish here caused by people. The psalmists are very honest in this regard. But they have a strong view of God. They're fixed in their understanding of who God is. In Psalms, God is portrayed as a powerful and righteous judge. So even during the times when there seems to be expressions of hatred or even violence, they look at God as the righteous God. And in the laments are complaints, but they're complaints before a universal judge. They brought before someone who will act. A universal judge who is able to act on the psalmist's behalf. Let's share a little bit about imprecations. We've already mentioned that imprecatory psalms call down curses or misfortune on enemies. They're very relatable, but they're also purposeful. And in case you're curious about imprecations, they're not all in the Old Testament. Even the New Testament has its share of imprecations. Galatians 1 calls a curse, right? And we find this also in Revelation. So, how do we respond when we have times of trouble, times of anguish, like the psalmists? The laments tell us that they had godly response based on a couple of principles. First, they hated evil and injustice. It is clear that they were in a position that will not share in wickedness. While the world waffles and excuses, the psalmists will not identify themselves with the evildoers. Also, there's a desire that justice will be executed. The psalmists try to see the end point, the time of resolution. There's also giving trust and surrender. It's all up to God. It's not up to me. It's up to God to bring retribution. Justice is not the same as revenge for the psalmist. And also they appeal to God's good name. God ought to deal with evil, so his name is not smeared. So there's a zeal in the psalmist that goes hand in hand with the shame that God's people feel when sin is exalted and righteousness is condemned. So he's on the side of God. I want to make sure, God, that your reputation is upheld. Let's talk about the benefits of honest prayer. When we are honest in our prayer, you come to realize your own feelings. You are more in touch. You don't have to be angry with people also all the time. I tell people the Psalms actually help us with anger management. Because many times you just blurt out, you take it out on people, right? But when you learn to lament like the psalmists, then you manage your anger. You express feelings to God, and that provides catharsis. There's a cleansing. And also, God becomes more of a comforter and friend. God, you feel that closeness to God when you've expressed yourself to Him. You've articulated your anger, your fears, your despair. If you want to study this out more, if you want to study out more about the Lament Psalms, I want to encourage you to check out my website, addtoyourlearning.com. You see there more on Psalms and more lessons on Old Testament theology and as well wisdom passages. And also, you can check out my podcasts on Doug Jacoby's website, douglasjacoby.com. I have 10 podcasts there on the Psalms. Let me end here with some practical direction. Give enough time to connect with God. It's hard to lament when you rush your prayers, right? So give time. John Lust talks about how we break through prayer ceilings. It's almost like there's an emotional ceiling, but if you give time, right, to God, you break through emotionally, and it's just a whole new level of prayer. Also, wrestle with your feelings when you're praying. Don't worry about censorship. Don't disciple yourself prematurely. Wrestle with your feelings. Try to find words for your feelings before God. And sometimes they won't be outlined. They won't be neat. But thank God He is not bothered by our bad prayer outlines. Also, search the Psalms for emotional connection. I encourage people to find your feelings in the Psalms. There's always a Psalm for you. Whatever you're going through, whatever life stage you're at. Here's an activity that you can do. Let's take a minute of silence here. Rate yourself in your level of openness and honesty to God. No pressure here. Just be truthful. Just be honest. So, where are you at? 0, you're not honest with God at all. And 5, very honest. So if you can put a line on your paper there. Students via distance, you can pause this video and go ahead and think about that. Where are you at on this scale from not honest to very honest? And while you're at it, I want you to think about also what are some things you can start doing to build an honest prayer life. I want to close with sharing about some Asian disciples who have overcome negative feelings of opposition, negative feelings in opposition. I want to share about Uncle Danny, a different Danny than we have here. Uncle Danny Estioco. Here's his wife. His family became disciples, his kids first. He followed at the very end. But he was a persecutor for a long, long time. He didn't like the idea of studying the Bible. And so he always had this opposition against his kids becoming Christians. And he's telling them all these negative things about God and about the church. And he was very critical about the church. But one time he was brought to church by his family, right? They all had become disciples. Little do we know that he was observing the church. He was observing how Christians go through tough times. And he saw that there's an authenticity about Christians even when they go through opposition. Obviously, it was hard for the kids and the wife to receive persecution. And I'm sure they prayed some imprecations of some sort, right, through the years. But finally, he changed. Uncle Danny changed. And he decided to study the Bible. And here he is at his baptism with his son baptizing him. Right? He goes to the waters of baptism, makes Jesus Lord. His son baptizing him there. I'm sure his son kept him in the water a long time, right? You know, got to make sure everything's cleansed. But then here's the victorious family right there. But they went through that opposition, and God's justice shone through. You might ask how long before this happened. They were praying for their dad for 14 years. A miracle, 14 years in the making. I end with the story of the brothers from the Jerusalem Church of Christ. Here's a couple of brothers from Jerusalem. I was able to visit. God's grace right there. I was able to visit. Here's one of the young Christians. He's still stunned from his baptism, as you can see, right? But I want to introduce you to Aziz. Used to lead the church in Jerusalem. Aziz lived in the Palestinian district, and his brother was killed as a young lad because of the violence in Palestine. And he lived with that bitterness growing up. It was heavy on him as he grew up. Well, he was met by Christians. He studied the Bible, and he realized he had to deal with his emotions. All this war around him had just eaten him up, and just so much pain and bitterness and anger there. But you know what he did, because now he realized, I'm a Christian, I need to deal with my emotions. And I need to deal with this idea that there are enemies all around me. You know what he did? He started a support group for victims of the war. It started small, but then some families came together. The victims of families, people who were also in mourning because their family members or their friends had died. The support group grew from a couple of families. In a few years, it grew to several dozens of families. It caught word, and people were coming over for healing. It's helped a lot of people tremendously. He's now a professor at George Mason University, and he still promotes peace in the Middle East. Just goes to show the power of prayer. When you bring your suffering to God, when you're honest in your prayers and you lay them before your throne, no matter how bad things are, the laments flow into the throne of God, and He finds a way to bring peace to your heart. Let's be honest in our prayers. Let's be genuine. Let's strive for authenticity in our walk with God and see His power in our lives. Amen.